Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished professional from Mumbai, India, Dr. Vidhi Vora. Vidhi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Vora is the founder and chief executive officer of the Green Phoenix Circular Solutions. She pursues a vision, passion, and dream of conserving and creating a sustainable, healthy, and safe environment for all living beings and not just humans. So, Vidhi, my first question is tell me a little bit about your own journey and what inspired you to pursue a career in environmental science and sustainability.
So I would put it this way that I already had an interest in this area, whether you say it environment sustainability or whether it is conservation of the environment. This interest always was there right from the time was as I was a child. I used to pursue it like as an extracurricular activity,
Mm,
uh, being associated with different NGOs, doing some cleanups and all of that. And along with that, there was this passion of giving something back to the society.
mm,
So wanted to do something that would help the society be in a good place and something good for the society.
mhm,
But when I wanted to pursue it full time, it was not considered as a very mainstream career at
mm,
that time. It was like, a few years ago when it was
mm.
not considered like, that environment science would be a mainstream career.
Right.
And so the next option was like, getting into the medical field because, again, as I told you, I wanted to give back to the society. So
Mm,
that is how I started my journey by pursuing a degree in medicine and practicing it for a number of years. But my experience during those years and having a small stint staying in Uti as well for a couple of months
mm,
reinforced the fact that when it comes to medical treatment or human health per se, it is not just symptomatic treatment that would really help improve our health in the long term. We
right.
see a lot of chronic illnesses, which are more of lifestyle based illnesses or the kind of environment people are living in, or how is their interaction on a day to day basis to not even their work environment.
Mm,
And that is where that passion and an interest of giving back to the society crossed, and I decided that okay, let me not limit myself to just prescribing medicines or symptomatically
mm.
treating patients, but let me go one step above and try and do something in the environment science and sustainability space and try to make the environment more better so that we are able to improve the health of humans.
Amazing. Thank you for all that you're doing. I think we are all should be grateful to people like you who are making a difference. And certainly people from my generation, the boomers who actually messed up the entire environment. But tell me, Vidhi, what are some common misconceptions about sustainability that you have encountered?
One of the most common misconception is that sustainability is looked at only from the environment sustainability point of view, and a lot of time looking at the social and the economic aspect of sustainability gets missed out.
Mm,
Most of the times, even when we are working with organizations or we look at the goals that organizations have, most of it has a very narrow viewpoint wherein, like, they are looking to improve their impacts on the environment, but parallelly they do not view on how they can even improve their social impacts,
mm,
and parallelly doing this how they can even improve their economic performance.
mm,
So a lot of times we have to, like, make them look at, like, the whole picture rather than just looking at it at in a very narrow mindset.
mm.
Another thing right now is, like, a lot of talk is happening in relation to climate change, and a lot of talk is with relation to how we can reduce our carbon emissions,
Mm.
which kind of leads to something known as what we call as a layman, like, carbon tunnel syndrome.
Right.
too much focus is there on only carbon footprints. But when you look at climate change and what is causing it and how we can prevent it from happening, there is a whole lot of other things also that need to be taken into consideration. Right from carbon dioxide is not just the only greenhouse gas that needs to be focused on. There are a lot of other greenhouse gases which are more potent,
Mm,
that also needs to be taken into consideration. Your
mm,
other functions that are there within the organization, or probably even as individuals, that are contributing to climate change, and how these are also related to the other issues that we face,
mm.
or the other risks that are faced by the organization and people per se. Like, if you look
Right.
at the top 10 global risks given by World Economic Forum, there are a lot of other risks where each of it has some association with the other.
Mm,
And that is why we need to have a look at a much more broader picture than just looking at it from a very narrow viewpoint.
mm. Great response. And what would you say is your vision for a sustainable, healthy, and safe environment for all living beings?
So for me, my vision would be that currently the kind of relationship that humans have with the environment or with the other living beings is more of a parasitic kind of a relationship that we currently hold, where we tend to keep consuming, and we are not letting the resources that are there out there, we are not giving it adequate time to regenerate itself. And my vision would be that we transition from this parasitic relationship to having a more of a symbiotic relationship with the environment,
Mm,
where we consume, we let it regenerate. So it leads to not just sustainability for our existence, but also for the other living creatures that are there, that are co-sharing space with us in the on the planet. So that
mm.
is the vision that
Well
I hold.
said. Well said. Well said. When I was reading about you and preparing for my conversation with you, I was also very intrigued by this term, the triple planetary crisis. Tell me a little bit about the triple planetary crisis and why is it important to address it holistically?
Yeah. So as I told you, the global risks that are put out by World Economic Forum. So the triple planetary crisis is basically what is also called as the polycrisis, which includes three environmental issues that we are facing. One is climate change. Second is biodiversity loss, and the third is degeneration due to pollution.
Mm,
Now, these three as a whole are actually very much interconnected, even on from the impacts point of view, but also what is causing these three crises also.
mm,
Now, if I look at it, I can give you an example from the climate, like how these three are associated with each other. If we look at, heat levels rising because of increased global warming, now that per se leads to increased temperature in the oceans. Like, the basal temperature that is there in the oceans, that tends to keep rising.
mm,
And there are certain species that are there in the oceans
mm,
and on land as well, that are very sensitive to certain temperature changes.
mm,
Even minor temperature changes can impact how they thrive, can impact even how they reproduce. So because of that, if the temperature is rising because of climate change, you will see an impact on the reproduction numbers of these species, which eventually, if they fall, can lead to biodiversity loss.
mm,
So this is how it is related. Parallelly, because of increase in temperature of the ocean, we also see loss of plankton levels in the ocean, which leads to degeneration of the ecosystem that exists
mm,
in the ocean. The whole food chain
mm.
gets impacted.
Right.
And then this eventually impacts. Now, if the plankton numbers go down, the overall carbon fixation that happens in the ocean will go down, and
Mm,
then that will again lead to increased chances of global warming and more
right.
climate change. So basically all of these crises, all three crises are interrelated to each other.
Mm,
They interact by positive and negative feedback systems.
mm,
And so, because they are so interconnected, we need to to solve the issue also from a holistic point of view and not just taking one issue at a time.
mm,
Quite often, we hear of air pollution being taken into consideration, and it is a lot of these air pollutants itself which are contributing to global warming. So,
mm,
if we are looking to combat climate change, we also need to address the other issues like air pollution. If we are looking at combating biodiversity loss, because the carbon cycle is in such a way that it is the biodiversity that interacts with the atmosphere and reduces the carbon content in the atmosphere, we need to make sure that we are addressing all the three crises together rather than looking at it individually.
well said. Well said. What a great response. Let's now move a little bit and talk about the companies and the organizations which really need to do much more. And a lot of companies are doing a lot of work, but I'm sure as a country, as a world, we need our businesses to do more. So my question to you is, what are some key challenges organizations and businesses face when transitioning to circular business models?
So one of the most important challenge that most organizations currently face is from the data point of view, because when it comes to addressing or bringing change, like the current business models that they have, and trying to transition to circular business models,
Mm,
we really need the data on how they are currently performing from the circularity point of view or from the circular
right.
lens perspective.
Mm,
There are certain assessments that need to be done so that we are able to evaluate how they are performing currently, and based on that performance, that becomes like the basal level, and based on that, then they can start, like going in a stepwise manner of trying to become more circular.
mm,
So the issue number one comes from the data point of view. Second issue is finances. There is a need of funding that is required for
right.
organizations so that they are able to, like make this transition, because when it comes to circularity with business models, it is not just a single organization that is involved, or
Mm,
not a single, probably a manufacturing unit, but it requires the involvement of the whole supply chain. And quite often, the upstream or the downstream supply chains, especially in India, have a lot of MSMEs that are there.
right.
And not all the MSMEs have adequate finances that they have to
Mm,
actually bring on these changes. They're already struggling on a day-to-day basis to get their businesses in place, or like making sure that they are able to fulfill their duties, and they do require this financial support that may come probably in the form of some good policies from the government, or maybe it can come from, like probably certain budgets being allotted, or probably certain different subsidies that can be given, so that, like they start making this transition.
mm,
So that is another challenge that currently is being faced. And the another challenge that organizations, the third challenge that we per se see is talent, adequate talent that has the skills to make these transition.
mm,
Because a lot of times, the traditional way of how things have been happening and how people have been skilled till now has been from the viewpoint of how probably the industrial 3.0 has functioned.
right.
Even if we look at individuals passing out and joining organizations, most of them are skilled in the typical way, and there is a lack of talent that exists in this space, and that is also a challenge that is there.
Very interesting. What Thank you for, such a detailed explanation. I mean, I've learned many new things in this response itself. But, Vidhi, you just spoke about supply chains. Can you also talk about the importance of reverse logistics in achieving sustainability goals?
Sure. So when you look at circularity, the currently a lot of focus is there on recycling. So recycling is basically, if there is any product that we are using,
Hmm.
I will answer this question from the point of view of probably a cotton T-shirt.
Hmm.
So if you're using a cotton t-shirt, what usually happens is that at the end of life, when the consumer has used it and it is no more usable, what usually happens is there is an option of putting it into recycling, and this recycling would help to retrieve the material that has gone into the cotton t-shirt, and it can be reprocessed
Okay.
to be able to put back into the supply chain.
Style.
But when it comes to circularity, recycling is not the only option to make a supply chain more circular. Recycling is usually considered as the last option from the circularity point of view.
Hmm.
There are different levels of the framework where circularity can be applied before we are actually even considering recycling. And it is at these levels where a lot of reverse logistics is needed,
Hmm.
so that we are able to retrieve the material that is there in any product or any consumer product that is being used,
Hmm.
so that it does not go into waste. Because more often than not, any product that we use probably has lost its value as a product, but the materials that are going into it have still hold the value.
Hmm.
And most often than not, it gets, because of improper waste management, or probably there's no knowledge of how it can be disposed of,
Hmm.
it gets disposed of, ends up in a landfill, polluting the environment. So here we look at two losses: one, that we are losing out on precious resources, and secondly, we are also polluting the environment because the waste is not getting segregated.
Hmm.
I will give an example of, for example, if you're losing a laptop,
Right.
the laptop on which we are currently communicating. Now, once it leaves the factory door and reaches the consumer uses it for a certain period of time, and then there is a probability that probably they face issues with the display, or they face issues with the motherboard not working, or some other issue due to which they want to let go of the laptop.
Hmm.
But if you look at the laptop from the materials point of view, probably the motherboard isn't working, but the materials from, right from the frame of the laptop, the keyboard, the display, the wiring that goes into it has a lot of metals and precious rare earth materials going into it.
Right.
Like, the list is quite long. And getting hold of these materials also has a lot of impact on the environment because
Correct.
of the mining.
Hmm.
So whether you look at silver, gold, rare earth materials, chromium, copper, a whole long list is there. So the removing these materials from the environment, processing it in itself has a huge sustainable impact or an environmental impact that exists.
Right.
Now, when for a person the use of the laptop is not there, just because one part of it isn't working, but unfortunately if you're putting it into waste, you're losing out on the value that is given by all the other
Right.
parts that are there. So, if there is a possibility that this laptop could be put back into the supply chain at different levels,
Hmm.
probably it could be returned back so that it can be, like, probably just the motherboard can be changed,
Hmm.
and probably the laptop can be put again into use and extend the life of the laptop. That could be one option. Second option is probably retrieving other parts of the laptop and putting it into the new product. So what I basically I'm referring to is refurbishing or remanufacturing.
Correct. Correct.
So again, you are not wasting all of the other materials that are there, and
Hmm.
you are saving on not just your cost but also the new set of materials you would need to create a completely new product.
Amazing.
So for all of this
Hmm.
to happen is why reverse logistics needs to be established,
Hmm.
not just from the informal waste collection point of view, but organizations also need to take it into consideration.
Well said. Well said. My next question, Vidhi, is about your own firm, Green Phoenix Circular Solutions. How do you and your team help organizations implement sustainable frameworks?
As I mentioned, our role basically is comes into picture by bridging the gap that
Hmm.
exists, one, from the talent point of view. So we help upskilling and we help in training uh, the members of the organization at different levels, whether it is CXOs, whether it's senior level managers, and even people working at the shop floor, trying to upskill them and improve their skills from the sustainability point of view, and bridging the gap of helping them establish different sustainable frameworks within the organization. Now, how we go about this is by first of all assessing their current performance from the sustainability point of view. So,
Mm,
there are different assessment parameters that are there, which include ISO parameters, life cycle assessments, how they are performing from their greenhouse emissions point of view. So, we make use of all of these different methodologies to assess their current performance from
mm,
the sustainability point of view. And also, there are certain organizations who have already been voluntarily reporting on their sustainability
mm,
reports. So we take hold of all of this data, and we create their performance at currently. Based on their performance, then we start identifying different uh, areas where they can improve in a stepwise manner.
mm,
First, what we look at is, like, the low hanging fruits. We look at, like, how certain small changes, even when even from, like, improving how the material flow is there within the organization.
mm,
Right from that, we start assessing, like, how we can look at different parameters, and then help them set up short term and long term goals of how they can improve their sustainable performance,
right.
and then ticking off the boxes one after the another. So
Mm,
usually our relationship with organization is quite long term.
mm,
It's not, and not always we would see results immediately. We
mm,
always strive for continuous improvement, but, like, it is always like a to and fro, give
correct,
and back relationship that
correct.
exists, and in a stepwise manner we try to help them improve their sustainability performance.
Amazing. We have time for two more questions. My next question is that how do you incorporate health and safety considerations into your sustainability initiatives?
So basically what we do is based on ISO 45001.
Mm,
So there are certain parameters that are there that need to be taken into consideration when organizations are looking to improve their health and safety performance. So we as an organization help them, first of all, we do the root cause analysis of the organization, and then based on the root cause analysis, we also do auditing of how they are performing from the health and safety point of view,
mm,
making use of the ISO 45001 framework. And then based on how their health and safety framework is there in the organization, then we suggest them different ways on where they need to improve, where they are performing well,
mm,
and then uh, we assess their performance on a 3 months and a 6 months duration, and that is like a continuous cycle that goes on.
mm,
Now, most often we take into consideration different policies also, the Companies Act that is there, which is there in India, the Labor Act. So all of these policies are also taken into consideration when we are evaluating the health and safety performance of organizations. Now, quite often people wonder that what has health and safety have to do with the sustainability performance of an organization. Here, I will give example of two environmental disasters that most of us know about. One is the Bhopal gas tragedy, and second is Chernobyl. Now, in both these areas, we've noticed that because health and safety was not given a lot of importance, or it
mm,
was not considered, like, that it is essential to be given looked at uh, in a critical manner, led to a bigger disaster than which could have been avoided if it was caught when it was, like, a small issue that can be there.
mm,
So when it comes to health and safety, we are assessing what are the risks that are there within the organization, and what risks they possess to in and around, like, the environment that they are present in. We are also looking at if there are any minor incidents or accidents that have taken place in the past, and how they can be prevented
Mm.
so that that incident does not convert into a major accident in the future.
Right.
So when, if we are able to prevent most of these, then we are also contributing to sustainability from the social point of view, where we are making sure that the health and safety of the employees working within the organization is taken care of,
Mm.
also of people living in and around the premises is being taken care of, and
Mm.
eventually preventing a disaster from happening, so that damage to the environment also doesn't take
Well
place.
said. And my last question to you, Vidhi, based on your amazing understanding of sustainability, what message would you like to share with our listeners about sustainability for all living beings?
So there are two messages that I would like to share. Number one is, or try and focus more from the conservation point of view
Mm.
than from the restorative point of view.
Yeah.
Of course, we have reached a point where there has been quite a lot of destruction that has happened. There
Mm.
are issues that we are facing, but now is the time where we can put a benchmark on not going worse from here, try and conserve what already exists, and of course, restore what we have lost, because whatever have we already have is something, it's not always easy to replace. We talk about species and living beings that have gone extinct, and it has not been possible to bring them back after they've got extinct. But
Correct.
most living beings have some role to play in the environment and how the whole planet functions. So try and focus more on conservation and not just restoration.
Mm.
And the second message that I would like to give is, no matter what role you play, whether you are an academician, whether you are an industrialist, whether you are a policy maker, whether you work for the government, or whether you are a student, eventually all of us are consumers in some way or the other,
Mm.
whether
Mm.
at an individual level or whether at an organizational level. And it is time that all of us start looking at our consumption patterns
Mm.
at different levels,
Yeah, right.
looking at our the products that we use from a life cycle point of view,
Mm.
so that we are able to transition from this parasitic relationship to a more symbiotic relationship.
Mm. Amazing. And on that note, Vidhi, and your two amazing messages focus on conservation and not restoration. And second, you said we are all consumers. Let's start looking at our own consumption. Thank you so much for speaking to me. It was amazing to see a medical doctor turned into a planet doctor. And I learned so many new things from you about sustainability today. Thank you for all the great work the Green Phoenix Circular Solutions is doing. You gave me two examples of where we went wrong. One was Bhopal and Chernobyl. And I distinctly remember Bhopal because my parents were there in Bhopal that night. And he was an army officer and he saved 3 or 4 thousand people that night, for which
Okay.
he got the Kirti Chakra. So as you were speaking about Bhopal, it just took me back to that fateful day when they were both there. But thank
Okay.
you so much for speaking to me and all the very best to you and everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashutosh. It was great speaking with you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.